Nobody ever got far in a hack and slash by stabbing somebody with a fork. At least unless you played in one of my games, right? Actually, the reason I got this is because, for logical reasons, I don't keep a small arsenal handy. So I don't happen to have a dagger, which is the topic of my little video blog today. Why is it that in most RPGs, most hack and slash fantasy, even science fiction games, everybody carries a dagger, or almost everybody carries a dagger, but they rarely ever use it? It's an underappreciated weapon for a number of reasons. I grant you that, okay, it's a, they say the wizard or the mage class, that's one of the few weapons they get to pick, and the rogue gets advantages, the assassin gets advantages using a dagger, but for the most part, a lot of people lug them around, but they rarely ever use them, other than as a showpiece. And of course, then you can make the argument from the medieval perspective that everybody had to have a knife to cut their meat. Well, actually, the dagger and a knife were distinctly different utensils. Even back then, the argument can be made that an actual good dagger is the equivalent of a combat knife today. It is a well honed, well oiled, heavy bladed weapon for the most part that's used for close encounters and for last ditch defense. Now, that's something that I've played in a number of games with GMs that never occurred to them to put their players into that situation. There are a few crit charts, especially the old Rollmaster stuff, which, like I said, I'm enamored with, and some others that a critical hit affects somebody's carried gear or weapon. This is why in Dungeons and Dragons and a number of others that weapons have hit points and hit die and capable of taking damage and being destroyed. Even a magical weapon is not 100% invulnerable, which ideally we don't want them to be. I use that to great as a GM. I use that quite to great. I don't want to say frequently, but to great success. It really frustrates some of the players occasionally, but the really good, dedicated players strive to overcome that and realize there's reason why there's certain feats and abilities that allow their characters to drop a weapon and grab another without a penalty. Or the traditional, I'm going to throw my dagger or hand axe at somebody. That's the most common use for the dagger. But like I said, I've discouraged players from carrying a literal arsenal. I'm a believer in the mechanics for a reason. So if your character has encumbrance because he can only carry so much mass, even a bag of holding has got limitations to it. And so carrying 3 or 4 spare swords, and getting to those swords in a pinch, well, there's the rub, right? You're not going to actually carry them strapped to your back or strapped to your hip. It's just encumbrance. That's the reason why they have encumbrance rules. It's awkward. It's the same reason why we have slots that allow a limit to how many weapons and magic items can be on a given part of the body. It's it's a check and balance. It came from a lot of years of experience where people overutilized things to the point where it was absurd. And so some people got together in the designing circles and the player circles and said, hey, let's put some fixed rules to limit what we can use and where we can use it. So when we do things like carry these weapons, it's just for show. Now, there's occasional use where I've got to carry an axe and a hand axe and maybe a short sword or a bow, which is a different kind of weapon. It goes on a different part of the body, and you don't use them ideally in the same immediate situation. Swords are still for up and close and personal, as opposed to, say, a bow, which is you're going to use from the distance to keep your opponent away from you or to reach out and touch them before they get away. In my opinion, the dagger is really underused, and the general melee, if you will. Well, it's a disadvantaged weapon, it's a short reach weapon, blah blah blah. Well, I disagree with that. I mean, I believe that in the right circumstances, a dagger is a superior weapon over a long sword any day. And I try as a GM to remember the situation when it occurs. We're in a limited environment, and we're in a catacomb, or we're in a natural occurring cavern where a swinging space is limited. Those smaller weapons really start to shine, if you will. And like I said, and the other one is these random crit hits. Crit doesn't always have to be something that does duper damage, devastation and damage to your opponent, or vice versa. It's just like the opposite of a crit, which we don't see a whole lot of people comment on, the fumble. I like the fumble too. This is where this plays in well with the dagger. You're fumbling. You're using your primary weapon and you fumble, or you get a crit, or your opponent gets a crit and hits your weapon and damages it, or manages to disarm you and knock it out of your hand. And now the rules for disarming, I'm a little bit I'm not exactly pleased with, because basically it just drops at your feet and you grab it. You either get a penalty for grabbing it, or you get an opportunity to make a grab for it using dexterity or agility or a combination thereof. Uh, when in reality, in harsh combat, especially physical clash weapon kind of combat, you see it in the movies, and I think they get that right. In the real world, somebody hits your sword hard enough, it's gonna and you lose a grip of it. It's gone. It's gonna go flying. It could land 20 feet away, or it could go pitching over into the high grass where you can't find it immediately. And I like to see that. I like to put my players into that scenario whenever I can, whenever it occurs. I don't go out of my way to create that scenario, but if it occurs, I like to see them up to the challenge at them. And a lot of them, that's where they reach for that second and third weapon, because, hey, that's why we carry them, right? But the occasional one is just the home, the little dagger. Uh, to me, it's a step towards the realism in creating a fictional environment that feels real, where you have to find the challenges and to overcome them. Making use of your dagger in environments or in situations where you're not usually uh, going to use one is part of the deal, and you get extra experience from me for thinking outside the box, or going for that particular option. Uh, you know, it's just something to keep in mind when you're out there gaming. I hope you all have a good afternoon, and remember, it's not always the size of the blade that matters.